Hello, and welcome to I Am Not For Everyone, the podcast for those looking to release shame, heal from trauma, and feel really, really good being their fully expressed, authentic selves. My name's Dr. Lee, and I am a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner and a certified clinical trauma professional, as well as a mom, wife, and a human being navigating the world with complex PTSD. Season 1 of this podcast came about because I was tired of spending decades living in a shame-filled, trauma-laden body and brain. And after doing a lot of work and learning how to return to a safe, grounded place in my life, I knew it was time for me to take my experience in education and use my voice to unsilence myself, to release the leftover shame, and to give others permission to do the same. On Season 2 of this podcast, I'm going to be sharing my experience in education. But even more importantly, I'm going to be bringing on some incredible guests who are going to unsilence themselves. They're going to share their own stories of trauma, shame, and their journeys to healing, resiliency, and self-acceptance. While I believe these episodes will be deeply impactful, I do want to add a disclaimer that we're going to be talking about some potentially triggering topics. So please take the invitation to pause or skip or fast forward on any episode, and to treat yourself gracefully and kindly after each time that you listen. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Hello. We're going to have a really, really fun chat today about fighting. I know a couple of people missed it. I did a live on Saturday about marginalized identities, intersectionality, and trauma. But it was on Saturday instead of the normal Thursday because I had been on vacation with my husband. So if you missed that, just you can go back and find this in the group. So we are going to be talking about fight today. And this is always, I love talking about fight because a lot of people, when we talk about this response, this physiological response to something scary, to a threat, a lot of people, this is one that we make ourselves feel really bad about. This is one of those responses, whether it's physiological, like there's something that is actually threatening our lives, versus it is more of a trauma response, meaning that our bodies are perceiving a threat. So whether this is a physiological, I actually need to fight to keep myself safe, versus I feel unsafe in this situation. And so I am going to have a expression of trauma, an expression of painful past learning where I fight back. And by the way, this doesn't just mean fighting physically. This can mean fighting with your words too. Whether either of those is happening, a lot of times we make people feel bad for having this response, especially women. When women have a fight trauma response, oftentimes, especially depending on if you are a woman of color or you are a woman who holds a marginalized identity, a lot of times you are shamed and told that you are wrong for having this response, whereas men oftentimes are more praised, or it's at least more socially acceptable for them to have the fight response. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about how you can identify when you are in a fight response, when you are expressing an expression of trauma through this fight mechanism. And we're going to talk about adrenaline addiction, which I alluded to in a post that I put up yesterday. This is one of I think is the most interesting things in all of the studying and education and learning that I've done in regards to trauma. The adrenaline addiction is real, and it's tied to some other things that happen in other trauma responses. So I'll go into that. So I want to just start off with talking about what the fight response is. So we, a couple of lives ago, we talked through the F's of the fear responses that we have as mammals, as animals, right? The very first one is fight. Fight is, I am going to use my strength, my skill, my energy to convince whatever actual threat is in front of me, that I am bigger, that I am stronger, that I can take it out, that it doesn't want to mess with me, because if it does, it's going to get hurt. That is the purpose of fight. Now, what I also want to say is this is some animals, they don't there's debate whether or not first fight is the very first physiological response for all animals, or it is only the first response for predators, for animals who are predators. There is an argument that flight might actually be the first physiological response in some animals that are not predators, that are usually seen as more prey. But that's neither here or there today. Today, I'm just going to talk about fight being the first one, because as humans, we are predators. We kill things to sustain our lives. Not all of us, but our species as a whole does that. We eat meat. We eat other animals. So the fight response is basically saying, hey, don't mess with me. You're going to get hurt. You don't want to do this. This is activation of the sympathetic nervous system. When the sympathetic nervous system is activated, our body is flooded with adrenaline. And adrenaline is actually kind of a colloquial term for two different chemicals that are released into our body. And these are epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are the chemicals that tell your body, get ready to fight or get ready to run. But they are chemicals that put our body into motion. And they also stimulate the release of cortisol. And cortisol is a chemical, is a hormone that tells the rest of our body, hey, we just dumped a bunch of norepinephrine and epinephrine into our system, which means that our cells are going to be using more energy. So we need to be prepared for that. We need to make sure that our energy source stays at a high enough level that our cells can keep working so that we can keep fighting or we can keep running. So y'all know what it feels like to be sympathetically activated. You know what this feels like. If you have ever experienced rage, if you've ever felt absolutely irate at something, if you have experienced significant anger, frustration, right? That is your sympathetic nervous system getting activated by something that feels threatening. Now, guess what? That thing that feels threatening isn't always actually threatening. A lot of times it's not threatening. It is a perceived threat, right? So let's talk about what a physiological threat, an actual threat is versus a perceived threat. So an actual threat that causes the sympathetic nervous system to get activated is something like you get in a car accident or you witness a car accident and there's somebody pinned underneath of the car. So somebody's pinned underneath the car. I am going to fight. Fighting is me fighting the car, right? Fighting is me lifting this car or doing anything I can, mobilizing into action against the threat. Not away from the threat, against the threat, in order to neutralize it, in order to make it not be threatening anymore. And so this is an important distinction because a lot of times people think that the threat has to be directed towards you in order for you to have a response, and that is inaccurate. The threat has to be directed towards something that you deem important, that you love, that you care about, that you feel like deserves you fighting for it. So this is the kid trapped under the car. This is when somebody says, or when somebody threatens, actually physically threatens someone that you love, right? And maybe you're smaller or weaker than this person who's physically threatening the person that you love. It doesn't matter. You go into fight response. You go into, I'm going to do whatever I need to protect my child, my partner, this person that I really care about in order to try to neutralize this threat. And I'm willing to risk my own life. I'm willing to put my life in danger in order to neutralize this threat. So that's physiological threat response. When somebody is actually trying to hurt us or something or someone that we care about, we mobilize and we move to try to fix it, to try to neutralize the threat. A trauma response is where we have maybe been in situations before where our lives have been endangered, where we've felt like somebody is threatening us, where somebody has actually threatened us. Maybe somebody has hurt us physically or sexually. Maybe somebody has threatened several times, who is bigger and stronger and faster than us, to hurt us if we do something. And at the time, maybe we couldn't fight. At the time, maybe we were a little kid. Maybe we were unable to fight this person off. And so we probably went into other trauma responses at that time, or other fear-based responses, threat responses. And now, as a grown human, as a grown person, somebody says something to you that reminds you of that person that hurt you before. And now we're bigger, and now we're stronger, and now we're faster. And so we want to fight now. It feels safe for us to fight in this situation. We no longer go to a mobilization. We go to fight because we can now. Now, some people aren't going to respond that way. Some people, if they weren't able to, with their past painful experiences, if they weren't able to fight then, they're not going to be able to fight now. And that's why we don't make any of these responses wrong, because it's an individual experience of what you feel safe doing from a threat response and what you don't. So please hear me in that. None of these responses are wrong. If you're somebody that you're like, I like literally never fight, I don't fight ever, that's okay. That just means that your nervous system doesn't feel safe fighting. And sometimes when we perceive threat, the actual places that we feel safe fighting are the places that we never have to actually fight. So I'm going to give you an example of this. Road rage, right? When you're in your own car and that person can't hear all of the expletives that you're stringing off to them. They can't see you flipping them the bird. They can't hear you calling them like some really nasty things. And you're not actually physically hitting them with your car, right? A lot of us go into fight in road rage when people do things to us there because it feels safe for us to fight. It feels safe for us to spout off at the mouth. It feels safe for us to puff up in our bodies and do whatever we do because we know that other driver can't actually hurt us. Or like the likelihood that other driver is going to hurt us is very low. We oftentimes, if we have trauma in our past, if we have, or where we have painful past learning, we will use the fight response in our lives today if it feels safe to do so. If we now feel bigger, stronger, and faster, or more skilled than whatever we feel like is threatening us. So this is why you can be the child of the parent who screams and yells and scares the crap out of you, where you feel physically threatened. And you can become the parent who screams and yells and scares the crap out of their kids. And there's usually a lot of shame wrapped up in this, right? There's a lot of shame as somebody who is a yeller, or was a yeller, I should say. As somebody who yelled a lot. I don't even want to give myself that characteristic, catching my language there. As someone who used to yell a lot. As someone who used to be forceful and more authoritarian than authoritative with my kids, because that was what I knew. There was a lot of shame tied up in that because I remembered being parented like that. And I remembered it not feeling good to be parented like that. And I also am noticing that when my kids do something that feels threatening, and you might hear that and go like, well, what could her kids be doing that feels threatening? When my kids do something that I was taught was a shameful thing to do, I am responding to them with fight and an attempt to get them to stop doing that shameful thing, actually as an act of protection, not from a mean place. If my kids do something and I yell at them, it's not coming from a place of, I want to make you feel bad. It's coming from a place of, oh my gosh, I have to get you to stop doing that thing right now because that's not a safe thing for you to do. Because my nervous system is saying that's not a safe thing for them to do, right? Because that's what it learned. This is how trauma responses and trauma patterns repeat themselves over and over. This is how, why children of abuse oftentimes become people who abuse others, or can become, I don't want to say often, can become, are more likely to become people who abuse others, is because of this shame that's getting passed down from nervous system to nervous system. So fight response, right? Like I said, there can be some issues with marginalized identities with this. Certain people are allowed to fight and certain people aren't. I can think of the very not nice term of angry Black woman, ABW, a term that women of color, brown and Black women, oftentimes know very well. Don't be an ABW, because when you fight, you are more threatening to other people than white women when they fight, or white men when they fight. There can be cultural pieces here. It can be more acceptable for certain identities to go into this threat response than for others. And there can be shame tied up for certain marginalized identities if they experience and externalize the fight response. So this is something that's really important to understand. So how do you fight? Fight. We kind of talked about what this feels like in your body: rage, frustration, anger, like you're irate, you're seeing red, you're going blind, right? And fight can feel, like I said, like a shameful state to be in, because for certain people, they have been taught that fighting is shameful, right? So I know for myself, the things that really, really bring me into a fight response, the things that trigger me into a fight response, are typically when I see people doing things that I would have never been allowed to do, that I was shamed for doing. When I see people being disrespectful, disrespect is a huge one for me that brings out fight, which is so interesting, because when I am in that fight response, I am not being respectful towards others, which then causes further shame if I don't understand what's going on, right? So this can look like I said, there's certain things that can set this off for you, like people being disrespectful, people not taking their turns or waiting for their turns, people being greedy, people being selfish, people being something that when you grew up, you learned, like, you are not allowed to be that way. That is wrong. That is not okay. And when people direct that behavior towards you, that you were never allowed to experience, that you were never allowed to sit in, that you were never allowed to be, that sets off your threat response. And if it feels safe for you in that moment, you are going to fight back. Fight response can also be passive aggressive. Anyone out there passive aggressive with certain people in their lives? Anyone super sarcastic? Anyone make some really nasty remarks? Those are pokes. Those are, hey, you just riled up my nervous system, and so I'm going to rile up yours back. I'm going to send you into fight response, and then I'm going to sit back and be like, oh my gosh, why are you fighting me? Right? This is taunting. This is poking your enemy and trying to get them to slip up. But this is a form of fight. A lot of people don't realize that. Passive aggressiveness is a form of fight. It's basically, I kind of feel safe fighting, but I'm going to poke you first and have you fight me back. And then I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, why are you fighting me? But if you didn't feel safe enough to poke, you wouldn't be passive aggressive. Fight can also look like something that I was talking about earlier, adrenaline. Fight being somebody who has been conditioned to experience fight often, or flight, because flight is also a sympathetic nervous system response. If you are somebody whose nervous system has experienced fight and flight often, you are going to experience something called adrenaline addiction. Now, notice I'm not saying that you are an adrenaline addict. You're experiencing adrenaline addiction. Do you see the distinction here? What you're going to notice when I do all of these lives is we're going to consistently take these behaviors and stop identifying with them as character traits. If you work with me and you have an addiction to something, you participate in addictive behaviors, you are not an addict. If you work with me and you display anxious behaviors on a consistent basis, you are not anxious. You are not an anxious person. You are a person who has anxiety. You are not a depressed person. You are a person who experiences depression. So you are not an adrenaline addict. You are a person with adrenaline addiction who experiences adrenaline addiction. People who had their sympathetic nervous systems consistently activated as children oftentimes will become caring professionals or people who put themselves in positions where they get to fight against illness, fight against the other side war, fight against the other side lawyers, justice, law. If you find yourself in a position where your job is to go into work and do battle against sickness or injustice or corrupt governments or anything like that. And by the way, we label most of those jobs as being caring professionals. Isn't that interesting? People who go into jobs working in the emergency department or the intensive care unit or being an EMT or a medic or being a soldier or being a lawyer or being someone or being an activist, someone who fights for something. Oftentimes, this is the serving behavior that comes out of this shadow side of I never got to fight when I was younger and I want to fight now. My sympathetic nervous system got activated all the time and I never really got to carry out those actions, but I was bathed in those chemicals over and over and over and never got to find a way to release them. And my system is used to getting bathed in adrenaline. My system is used to getting activated. And oh my goodness, now I am an adult and I can not only choose a way to have my system get activated, but also then participate in the fight response, which I always wanted to do and I never could. These are your doctors, oftentimes. And again, this isn't every doctor, this isn't every caring professional, but these are a lot of the people who go into becoming physicians, nurse practitioners, nurses, healthcare practitioners, military, police, law enforcement. Am I poking any? Am I calling any of you in right now with that? Anyone going, ooh, that's me. That was me too. The reason I'm able to say this kind of flippantly and with a smile on my face is because this was me, y'all. This was me. So when I was in my last year of undergrad, I decided I wanted to go to grad school to become a nurse midwife. And when I was in my first big girl inpatient rotation in the hospital, I was placed in the emergency department in a level 1 trauma center in one of the busiest ERs in the state, in the 6th biggest state in the nation. Like this was one of the places to be. And if I hadn't gone to school there, I was actually planning to go to school in Columbia University and work in New York Presbyterian as a acute care nurse practitioner, like one of the top trauma centers in the entire world. So little did I know, this was something where I was like, ooh, my nervous system is seeking out some adrenaline. And at first I was like, oh, this will be great, like birth, new life. And then when I was in that clinical setting, in that emergency department, I saw one of the most intense traumas ever. Like my preceptor said to me, you're not going to see that again, likely, while you're here. I won't describe it to y'all because for those of you who aren't into medical, it would probably make you throw up. And I remember my nervous system. I can still remember that feeling after that trauma was done because we went to take our lunch after taking care of this patient trying to save this patient for 90 minutes, not being able to save this patient, but doing literally everything we could. And we took lunch and I remember I was trying to eat my chicken nuggets and I'm doing this because my body is just bathed in adrenaline. And I remember coming home and telling my husband and he was and I was jazzed, y'all. I was jazzed. not about the fact that this patient lost their life, but about the fact that I could be in situations like that. And that month, I changed my specialty. I changed the trajectory of my nursing career and decided to become an acute care nurse practitioner, meaning a nurse practitioner who works in the hospital with very sick patients, as opposed to a nurse midwife. In nurse midwifery, you don't want things to go wrong. It's bad when things go wrong. In the ICU and in the ER, things are already going wrong and you get to make them right. You get to fix them. You get to fight to fix them. And unfortunately for me, I was also undergoing a lot of other stressors during this time. I ended up pregnant with twins and had some medical complications. I was only sleeping 4 to 6 hours a night, tops, or a day. My marriage was struggling because of everything we had going on. And what I ended up finding over the next decade is that the feeling of that adrenaline over and over and over and over and over for 60, 80 hours a week started causing burnout. My adrenals were literally like, we cannot keep up with this anymore. My adrenal glands that those are what produce cortisol. They were just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. And so they started failing on me. And so I started experiencing all of these really, really like burned out symptoms. And it got to the point where when I had already started this coaching business, I was starting to notice like, wow, this is actually like over here, I get to feel calm. Over here, I get to feel connected with other humans. Over here, I don't always have to be solving the problems. I don't always have to be fighting. I don't always have to be in this threat response. And mind you, none of this was going on in my brain. I wasn't noticing any of this from a trauma lens. I didn't have this language to put on what I was going through then. I have that language now. I can describe it now and look back on it now and say these things. But at the time, I was just like, I don't know what's going on, but like my job no longer feels good. And this is like really upsetting. This is very upsetting to me that this no longer feels good because this is the one place that I was getting my fix. This is the place I felt most productive. This is the place I felt most successful. I felt like I was screwing stuff up back at home. But this was the place that I could do it. And so when I decided to leave clinical practice, I knew that my nervous system needed that. And when I actually left clinical practice, a few months afterwards, I was not in a good space. Because my nervous system was so like, we don't know what to do here. We're missing chemicals that we used to get. We're starting to get more rest. We're starting to feel better physically, but also like things are just, I was going through this new regulatory process and I missed being able to help people cheat death. I missed being able to fight death. So I had to go through my own thing. And what I found when I stopped bathing my nervous system in all of those chemicals and I started giving my body rest and better nutrition and a better schedule and like more routine, that was when my nervous system said, hey, you've started healing enough that we want to show you some of the traumas that you've been repressing for a very long time. And so I actually ended up, and I've talked about this previously, but I ended up in one of I call it my dark month of the soul. It wasn't a dark night of the soul. It was a dark month of the soul. In June, I ended up in a significant prolonged emotional flashback due to some PTSD, some complex PTSD on vacation, 16 hours from my home with my husband and my kids. And I am so grateful that happened. And at the same time, what a lot of people don't know is that when you start to heal your nervous system, when you go into recovery, that's really what this is. When you say, hey, I don't want my nervous system to be addicted to adrenaline anymore. I'm really ready to live life from a more regulated space. As you start to do that healing, sometimes the very traumas that caused you to want to be in adrenaline addiction, that your body goes, okay, we're actually fine. Like if we're not going to keep bathing our nervous system in this means that we have to deal with it. And so repressed memories can come back. And I didn't know that. And it would have been really helpful to know that. And so I'm telling you all that right now in hopes that if you've gone through this before and had that happen, or if you are somebody that's considering like, whoa, I'm definitely doing this, And this is something I want to recover from. I want to heal from, just knowing that like sometimes this does happen. So this is above and beyond what I provided. This was above and beyond what my coaches, my trauma-informed coaches were providing. I went and got myself a therapist who was trained in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I went and got myself connected into organizations where I could be better resourced and be more supported above and beyond what I had had before, so I could process through some of those memories. And what I will say is that going through that and reprocessing and understanding and teaching my nervous system, hey, we don't have to be in fight anymore. We don't have to be in fight anymore. We are allowed to not get triggered by these things and have these things feel like threat responses to us anymore, because they're actually not threats. Our husband being disappointed in us is not a threat. Our kids doing something that we would have gotten shamed for when we were younger is not a threat. Not following in the footsteps of family or doing things that may be considered wrong or shameful by other people in my life, that doesn't mean that we have to feel threatened by that. And so what I started noticing is as I was doing this work, the desire to fight against things, the desire to fight for things started decreasing. And now when my husband criticizes something that I've done, or he doesn't even really criticize, when he just gives me feedback on something that I've done that didn't feel great for him or is out of alignment with how I want to show up, I'm not jumping down his throat anymore, getting really frustrated with him. Instead, I'm feeling the activation going, yeah, that didn't feel good to hear that about myself. And like, what does this mean? Like, was I actually doing this? Do I owe this person an apology? Do I want to change my behavior? I can actually have that thought process now instead of jumping into fight and saying some things that I don't want to say, or going into passive aggressiveness and saying, yeah, well, I might have done this, but you did that. And then like switching the conversation around, or doing things that just generally don't actually help me in that situation, but help me feel safe because my nervous system felt threatened. Instead, I can recognize that I already am safe and respond to whomever or whatever that perceived threat is from a regulated place. So if you are somebody that's experiencing adrenaline addiction, if you are somebody who's going, yeah, like this really is what drives what I do, what I want you to also hear is this: you don't have to up and leave your career like I did. I am still a nurse practitioner. I may go back and practice at some point. I'm not sure at this time. I told myself I'd give myself a little bit more time. I'm maintaining my licenses. I'm going to be volunteering in some ways that feel good, where I still feel like I can maintain regulation of my nervous system. And there is a way for you to find passion and really work for things, show up in support of things without fighting for them. And I know that this is probably a very novel concept for some of you. There is a way to show up in support and really make a massive difference in other people's lives and in ways that you want to make it without fighting. And for those of you who have fought pretty much your whole life, this may feel foreign, this may feel uncomfortable, this may feel impossible. And I want to honor you and witness you in that. And just invite you to consider the possibility that being in threat response, being emotionally activated, having that sympathetic nervous system running all the dang time is not necessarily serving you. And in fact, there is a more regulated, better feeling way to do the work that you want to do in the world without being in fight mode. So the last thing I want to say is this, is that fight mode is oftentimes contrasted in relationships with freeze or flight or fawn. So if you're like, I don't go into fight mode, what I want you to actually notice is if the people around you are fleeing, if the people around you in certain situations are trying to get the heck out of Dodge, If people in certain situations start fawning, meaning they are participating in people-pleasing behaviors to try to control whatever you are doing. If you're noticing your children fawning, oh my gosh, mommy, I'm so sorry. What do you need? Oh, I was such a bad kid. What can I do? If you notice the people around you freezing, if you notice them going into tonic immobility where their brains are racing and they're going a million miles a second, but maybe all they're saying, but their eyes are downcast and they're contracted and maybe all they're saying to you is, okay, yeah, sure, fine. If you have people in freeze, if you have people in fawn, if you have people in flight around you, I want you to consider the fact that although it doesn't feel like you are in fight, you probably are. Because the goal of fight is to make the person across from you not feel like they are as big of a threat as you are. And if the person across from you or the person with you, the people with you, feel like you are a bigger threat, that means they can't fight. And that means that they need to go into one of these other threat responses to try to manage you because you are the threat to them. So a little bit of harsh truth there, a little bit of maybe like, oof, right? When you start to think about that. And it's very helpful to understand and to know that. Now, sometimes people are going to go into fawn and freeze and flight around you because of their own things. You're not actually threatening them at all. That's their own trauma responses that they're participating in. And if you're noticing this consistently, if you're noticing this with your employees, if you're noticing this with your kids, if you're noticing this with your spouse, if you're noticing this with someone else that you come into contact with on a daily basis, or a group of people that you consistently communicate with, what that tells me as the observer is that you are probably participating or experiencing, acting in fight mode towards these groups of people or this person at least some of the time. And that's okay. The overarching message here is that being in fight mode is okay. We're not going to shame ourselves for going there. That's not going to help. It's just going to make it worse. We're also going to not pretend that we're not there because that's not helpful either. You're still going to go there and you're not going to have any responsibility or any ability to really then change if you're pretending that that's not where you are. So the goal of all of these trauma responses, these threat responses that we're going to talk through, the goal for all of these is for you to start noticing where you're doing it, to practice self-acceptance, to understand and try to get a little bit of clarity on why you're going into that place. We don't have to go into all of the traumatic memories in order for you to understand why you're doing it. You're probably already going to have a pretty good idea of like, oh yeah, like this is how this person used to show up towards me. And so this is how now I'm showing up towards other people who are now in the position that I was in, right? The goal is to get understanding. The goal is to get clarity. And the goal is to participate in self-acceptance, radical self-acceptance, because it is from that space that you can then begin to change. And then to just know that some memories may pop back up. Some things may come back up. And if that does happen, in this group, we have resources for you, or you can go out and find somebody, a therapist or a counselor, a psychiatrist that is trauma informed, that does understand threat responses, who can counsel you through this, who can help you reprocess some of your memories, who can really provide for you a safe space for you to work through these things. And the last thing I'll say is this, is a lot of you, in order to work through this, you don't necessarily need a therapist. Sometimes you just need a trauma-informed coach. Sometimes it is just going through and getting more knowledge and getting more understanding and getting more clarity. And sometimes it's just talking it through with the people that you love, going like, oh, I learned this about myself. I think this is what I'm doing. I want to figure out a way that, maybe there's a word you can say when I go into this that can trigger me to be like, oh, I am in fight, right? And I can learn to use the easy method that I've taught in here. You can go to the guides if you want to learn my easy method, which is a method you can use whenever you're activated to notice your activation, to then go through a process to figure out why you're activated, figure out what you want your next steps to be. But yeah, this is about understanding. This is about acceptance. This is about clarity. Then this is about how you can then move forward and change your behavior so that you can show up in support of the things that you really care about instead of fighting for or against them. So thank y'all so much for joining me today. I am really excited to go through the next several Fs with you over the upcoming weeks. So we're going to be talking about flight. We're going to be talking about freeze. We're going to be talking about fawning. By the way, I learned some really cool new things about fawning that have just come out from a research perspective. So I'm going to be sharing those with y'all in here. And then we're going to move into talking about fade/faint, which is the last F that we participate in from a nervous system perspective when we feel threatened. So we're going to be going through those in detail over the next several weeks. As always, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. I will come back and answer. Hashtag replay if you are watching on the replay so that I can come back by and say thank you. And I love you all. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your week. And I will see you next week. Thank y'all so much for taking time out of your busy day to listen to our episode. If it resonated with you, we'd absolutely love it if you'd give us a rating in the App Store or if you'd share the episode with a friend or two. And if you're looking for even more resources, community, and education around what it means to be trauma-informed and to live a psychologically safe life, we would absolutely love to have you join us in our free Facebook community, Becoming Trauma Informed. You can find the information in the show notes, and we're so excited to welcome you into our community.